So you may have guessed by now that today's service, the stories that we tell, came about after the Fresno County Board of Supervisors forbid any public library to celebrate Pride Month by displaying books or Pride material. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe libraries are for everyone. Can we just say that together? We believe. But we also know that this attack on libraries is a tiny part of a widespread governmental attempt to erase the LGBTQIA community, especially the transgender community and the non-binary community. But my dear ones, their stories, our stories, are part of the American story. They will not be erased. Today, 3 members of our congregation offer short reflections on a story or stories that have impacted their lives as LGBTQIA+ persons.
In my early 20s, I read a lot of LGBT literature. A few books that stand out include the classic young adult novel, Annie on My Mind by Nancy Garden. This book was written in the 80s, and it tells the story of 2 teenage girls in New York City, Liza and Annie, who discover their feelings for each other while doing everything possible to keep their relationship a secret. Another book that stands out is Stone Butch Blues by Leslie Feinberg. This semi-autobiographical novel follows Jess Goldberg, who passes as a man while working in the factories of Buffalo, New York during the 1950s. This book is full of trauma, pain, resilience, and survival. I consider it required reading for anyone who seeks a deeper understanding of their roots as a queer person today. I also read 2 or 3 things I know for sure: Dorothy Allison's memoir on poverty, family trauma, and the process of claiming one's identity as both a lesbian and a feminist. This beautiful and raw story cuts deep as well, and it's also one I highly recommend. When I was first exploring queer literature, most of the books that I read were considered groundbreaking because they centered gay identity in ways that were rarely visible elsewhere. They gave language to experiences I hadn't yet learned how to describe. At the same time, the question at the center of many of these books I recall reading was, how do I live as a queer person in a world that may reject me? They focused on identity formation amidst the struggle to survive. A few years later, after moving to Fresno, I began attending the Fresno Real Pride Film Festival. And there I encountered something different. Entertainment for the LGBTQ community didn't always have to be about the coming out process or the realities of oppression. Often it was, but there was also space for stories about queer people experiencing the same joys, frustrations, and relationship challenges as everyone else. One film I remember that fits this category is the 2006 film Boy Culture. It follows X and his 2 roommates, Andrew and Joey. In the movie, X falls hard for his roommate, Andrew. Now, falling for your roommate, that was something I could relate to. But I guess that's a story for another day. Unlike the books I just described, the central question in Boy Culture wasn't whether the characters could possibly be gay. They already were. The story was about seizing the opportunity for a fulfilling life. Watching this movie and others like it showed me that queer stories, and in turn queer lives, include everyday things: humor, disappointment, friendship, desire, all the ordinary complications of being human. Instead of just, how do I survive as a queer person, queer stories can also ask, how do I want to shape my life? Representation is not only about seeing yourself in the story, it is also about seeing possibilities for your future.
When I thought about this reflection and a story that impacted my life as a Black lesbian woman, the Bible came to mind. Growing up in a strict Southern Baptist church, I was raised with a particular understanding of what the Bible said about who I was supposed to be and who God wanted me to become. That interpretation stayed with me for a very long time. When I was 30 years old, I was living with an older Black woman who was a devout Southern Baptist. Let me paint a picture of what this all looked like. Having grown up in that environment, I had a lot of experience with older Black women in the church. Women who would sit up in the front row with their hats, very expressive in worship and very rooted in their faith. As I got older and moved toward more autonomy in my own spirituality, I noticed something in myself. Sometimes when I would encounter older Black women in the community, I would feel anxiety. It wasn't about them as individuals. It was something in me that had been shaped by the very strict and judgment religious environment. I had been raised with the message that being gay, being lesbian was a sin, and that stayed with me. At this time in my life, while living with this woman, I was working hard on improving myself. The woman I was living with had noticed this, and she admired the work I was doing, and I appreciated her support as well. One day we were talking, and she sat down next to me with her Bible. She began talking about scripture, and while I listened quietly, I started feeling that familiar anxiety underneath it all. Then she put her Bible on her lap, looked at me, and told me directly that this was not what God wanted for my life, and that I was a sinner, and that I would go to hell for being gay. And just like that, I was hearing the same story I had heard in my younger years. I didn't respond. I just sat there. But later that day, I was very upset. I was angry with myself because I couldn't stick up for myself. I didn't understand why I froze. So I called my mom and told her what had happened. And the first thing she said was that what that woman said was wrong. She then told me she wanted me close and asked me to come back home. In that moment, my mom showed me unconditional love and support without hesitation. And this is exactly what I needed. This was the starting point of me fully living as my authentic self and not carrying shame or guilt about my sexuality. I started noticing how often I was hiding small parts of myself, like not using the pronouns I actually wanted for my partner or editing my language in subtle ways. I decided I was going to try something different. I started being more open about being a lesbian in my everyday life, outside my close family and friends. I stopped hiding. I didn't make announcements. I just stopped editing. And what I found was that most people didn't really care. Sometimes they didn't even comment, and that was grounding for me. It showed me that so much of my fear had been internal, not necessarily reality. For me, accepting myself fully meant letting go of the understanding of the Bible I had been raised with, and finally letting go of the weight or hiding my complete self. I loved being gay, and I was always proud of who I was. The shift was moving past the fear of other people's reactions. And once I did that, I became more confident in expressing and living my truth in my everyday life. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jesse James. I'm a they. I'm a queer, non-binary person. I know these differences in me are something to celebrate. However, I'm not just an M or an F, I'm an X. And it's sometimes hard to celebrate. There's those times when I've been harassed on the street, times when I've been attacked for using the wrong bathroom. There are times when I'm just burdened by the weight of steady messaging and media telling me the clothes that I'm interested in are not for me, and it makes it really hard to shop, ever. One story that has really inspired me over the years is about a group of people who were born into a normal society and normal families, and at a certain point, they realize they're different. Each one completely unique, intrinsically special and different. They are all mutants. I've read a lot of X-Men comics in my life. I've watched the TV shows, shout out X-Men 97. I've watched the movies. They inspire me because the struggle to find a place in society is just real, right? And Stan Lee didn't intend this when he created them, but is an important allegory for those of us dealing with how our differences fit in to the greater narratives.
Magneto was right.
Magneto's conversation with Professor X around how to respond to a violently bigoted populace is very real. Do you fight? Do you hold that vision of togetherness? There's characters like Morph and Mystique whose shape-shifting totally mirrors how I feel inside, going from a sports bro dad to a femme princess or a hearth queen. There are the Morlocks who live in the sewers because they're so different they don't trust being seen in the day of light. And then there's the people who live in their homes hiding their mutant powers. These are all myself. The X-Men give me an alternate universe and world to go into. They also help me make sense of this world. Their struggle is real because it's not easy. It's hard. I am often disappointed and hurt. I go through long periods of time not trusting people. I go through long periods of time not knowing exactly who even I am or how to make sense of myself in the context of all of this. And yet again and again, I come back to this story of the X-Men for strength, for hope. Because on my driver's license card, it officially declares me an X. I'm a they, and I have special powers.